Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Pulkit, CEO and co-founder of Chameleon, a product adoption platform that's raised $15 million in funding. Pulkit, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Super excited and want to just go ahead and jump right in and talk to us about what you're building there at Chameleon.
Yeah, so what we're building is essentially a user onboarding or product engagement platform. What it means is giving teams the ability to create in-app patterns like banners, modals, highlights, checklists, embedded get started pages, those kinds of things that ultimately help new users learn how to use your product or help you communicate featured updates, changes without coding. So it frees up your product or product marketing teams to create these, analyze these, optimize this in-product channel to drive growth without depending on engineering.
Take us back to the founding of the company. What were you doing that you were in the position to even observe that these problems existed and you needed to build a solution for it?
Yeah, I think there were like 2 or 3 key data points. One was when I and my co-founder were working on a mobile app startup, we were really worried about acquisitions. Like, how do we get more people using our product? And then at some point we did a user onboarding project where we changed it, revamped it, and saw the real impact for 7, 14, 30, 90-day retention. We're like, wait a minute, a lot more people are using our product because we did this user onboarding project. So we're like, okay, it sounds obvious now. Everyone talks about user onboarding is so key and activation is so key. But back in 2012, 2013, like it was a penny drop moment. So fast forward a little bit, we're kind of riffing on ideas to work on. And we were spending like a month on an idea. We talked to lots of people to do our research. And then we were thinking about like the moment that we began thinking about this idea was when we were learning how to use Asana for something. And there was a lot of switching back and forth between Asana's help center where we'd read a document or watch a video, pause it, go into Asana, and then try to learn how to do that thing or recreate that. And we said, hey, why isn't this video guidance more in the product? Why don't we have to keep switching tabs? We want it to be kind of a bit smart. So that's where the idea came from. We asked a lot of people about user onboarding and we learned a few things. One, they all knew it was important. It's like, yeah, we have to improve it. We don't like the current version. They felt like it was a big lift. You know, there's like, okay, it's a cross-functional project. We'll do it like once a quarter. Everyone will come together. It wasn't very iterative. And there weren't any go-to solutions. You know, unbeknownst to us, there were some new budding tools that were trying to solve the problem similar to us. But that showed us a path or an opportunity that was validated pretty quickly. And we realized with JavaScript, we could build a platform where you could build some stuff in a simple way and then run that for users in-app. And that's how the journey started.
And early on, were you thinking about it as a product adoption platform? Was it product onboarding? Like, what was that category that you were thinking about? Like, what category of tool? Or were you not even thinking about category at that point?
Yeah, I think we're first-time founders, somewhat naive. We didn't really think about category. I think I've got lessons a lot now on, which is like, you really need to be clear in your positioning, what category you're in and why you're better in that category. At the time, it wasn't even a category. You know, we called ourselves user onboarding platform to help you improve user onboarding. User onboarding definitely resonated as a pain point for people. People got it pretty quickly that it needs to be better. But yeah, it wasn't a product adoption platform. Use cases weren't, broad. So yeah, it was user onboarding at the beginning.
At what stage did you start to embrace that category term of product adoption? Was that recently?
It's later than I would like to say, but I remember talking to one of our competitors. And it was around the time that I think G2 or Gartner had started calling it a category, it labeled it digital adoption platforms. They were like, oh yeah, digital adoption, that sounds so 90s. But the category leader at the time, or the first player in the space, WalkMe, that's the term they coined. And part of that was because they were selling to non-digitally native companies. So they were selling to like companies that had digital products. They were selling to internal teams. And so it was a digital team they were selling to. And so they called it digital adoption. But what we realized is like, that's the name that's stuck in the category. And so instead of trying to fight this fight, well, we wanted to call it something different. The best way was to go and be part of that, accept that, embrace that, and then try to find our own angle to it. So yeah, so now we're very much DAP, digital adoption platform. Although, we are trying to do different things around it and try to show the differences that we have.
Take us back to making that decision, because the reason I ask, a lot of founders struggle with that. I think, they're kind of placed in a category and they don't like it. They don't like the term. They don't like how it's defined. They don't like the competitors they're kind of compared against. But in a lot of cases, from what I've seen, that is still your best option, is just to play in that category and kind of redefine it with your own point of view. But it's hard to make that decision. Take us behind the scenes. How did you justify that in your mind to be okay with that?
Yeah, I think some of it came from reading April Dunford's book around positioning. And, that makes it really clear what you should do. And, you got to listen to the experts. But I think what you talked about really resonates with me, because it was this like, I'm not like them. I'm better. I'm different. And I think it's something that founders should get over that hump of like, okay, yes, you might be different, but you need to listen to the market. And the market, they need to put tools into boxes, because that's how they compare. It's like, okay, I'm comparing this versus this, or how do I think about whether I should be thinking about your product or not? So I think that's a realization we came to after we were like, hey, how do we explain ourselves in a simple way? I think positioning continues to be a challenge for us because it's a really busy category. And it's one of these categories that got so many blurry edges. Like there's some tools that do a bit of what we do and a bit of other stuff, or most of the other stuff and some of what we do, or mostly what we do. And so it's kind of confusing. It's still an ongoing problem. But I think we've also seen some of our competitors also, from the outside undertake this change. Some others that I know that are like, oh yeah, we're now going to call ourselves DAPs when they didn't before, because it's hard to sell, when you're not as part of a category.
And are you selling to companies for the most part that have a line item established? Like they're sitting there saying, okay, we need a DAP, time to go hunt in the market and find the best solution? Or are you contacting companies and trying to convince them of like, hey, you need this category, you need this type of tool?
When we first started, it was all the latter. It's like, hey, why do we even need a tool? We should do this in-house. We build this in-house. Now I'd probably say like half of our new customers are ones that are switching from an existing player. And that's a very different dynamic. We're learning so much about the sales process there. It's very deep. It's much more sophisticated. And frankly, we love it because one of our approaches is to be really sophisticated and deep as a product. And we really narrow and focus on this bit. We don't do a bunch of product analytics or help center stuff or chat or email, things that other products and players do, so we can focus. So for us, when someone wants to go deep and it's like, okay, well, do you support nested properties from this integration? We're like, great, let's talk about that. And so that's a very different motion to the people who are first-time buyers. And for them, it's like a whole new world of like, wait, how does this even work? Like, how do I send you data? And how do I build stuff? And it's it's almost like two different positioning messages. And then layer on top of that, the companies that are digitally native, that software is their product and their lifeblood, their maturity and stack is so different to somebody who that isn't the case. So it is a positioning problem and challenge. And I've forgotten the start of the question even because I'm going on this thread, but it's different. It's very different. And we'll continue to evolve the positioning.
What else have you done to really learn about positioning besides reading April Dunford's book, which is obviously incredible? And you read her second book, by the way. She has a new one on sales narratives. That's also really good.
Probably time to read that. That sounds useful. I think, part of the learning is on the job learning. I think we've gone through multiple exercises around changing positioning, doing research around positioning. Ultimately, you basically have to use the words that your market or audience are using. Yes, you can maybe tweak something here or there. So I think it's something where every time I'm at a conference or every time I'm at an event, I ask the question like, hey, what do you call these things? Or what do you think of when we say this? So I think it's an ongoing process. I think the other challenge that we face in our category is that there isn't agreed and consistent taxonomy for the objects that we work within. So yes, there's a taxonomy for modals. People kind of get what modals are, but what's a slide out? What's a launch pad? What's a launcher? What's a hotspot? Like these things don't even necessarily have the same definition across the design world or product world. And there's no collective grouping of what these things are, because yes, there was this like product tours or product walkthroughs that people kind of know, but honestly, that's on the way out a little bit. That's old because people don't like the pop-up nature, the intrusive, invasive nature, people exit. So the patterns themselves are evolving. So now we offer things like embedded cards or inline banners, which are new patterns that teams are using to drive feature awareness and adoption, but there's no single term for all of these things. So, their product-led growth became a big thing that people gravitated towards maybe 2 years ago. That's less flavor of the month now. There's a product-led sales moment. That's less flavor of the month now. So it's a surprising struggle. Like as a founder, it's like, just build the thing, but actually positioning and packaging is a really important component to connecting with the market.
It's funny when I just reflect back on the interviews that I've been having here the last 3 years. Like you said, 2 years ago, everyone was talking about PLG. When I talked about What are your top priorities? People were shifting to PLG. Now, when I ask that question, a lot of people are like, so we tried PLG, it didn't work, and we're going back. I'm guessing from like your vantage point, you probably have good insights into like what it takes to get PLG right. What would those things be? Like, what are the common patterns or common traits of companies to get it right?
Yeah, I think the first mistake is that people think of it as a big switch. Like we're going from sales led to product led. Like it needs to be like a 180 or it needs to be a right angle. It really isn't. It's all little like edges. You're like chipping away. And a simple way to think about it is what are you doing today that's a pretty repeatable process that could be automated, or some stuff could be put into the product. And so just chip away at those edges. You don't need to completely about turn. An example of that is you're conducting demos, one-to-one demos. Instead of that, what about letting people into the product? And maybe there's like 3 features you show off, and then you prompt them to join a group demo in the product. And so it's like, hey, sign up for this webinar we're hosting on how to use our product. And so you're still doing a person-led training on it, but maybe you're going from one-to-one to scale. And maybe instead of offering people the ability to sign up for this via email, you offer it as an in-product notification. And that's a really simple way to like move towards this. But if a company is thinking about PLG and it hasn't really worked and wants to do something, I think the easiest place to begin is current customers and driving expansion revenue from existing customers. They're already using your product. They're already convinced about you as a brand, and likely you know a lot about them, about what their use cases are, what they're trying to do, and where they're coming up against blockers or ceilings for the plan they're on. And so you know a lot about, which will enable you to target them at the right moment where they have a pain and give them a pretty simple offer. Now, that offer can still involve sales. We have a customer, Chili Piper, which basically prompted users in-app at the right moment to say, hey, book a call with your account executive to unlock more automations. They knew people were hitting a ceiling on that. And the conversion rate to booking a call, getting on the call, and closing revenue was incredibly high. I think they were closing hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue within weeks. And it's not anything new. They didn't change their system of how to sell this feature. It was just about prompting people at the right moment in the product. So I think if PLG didn't really work, I think common reasons for that is like you oriented too sharply into it. You might have picked off harder to succeed use cases versus, for example, customer upsells. And then the other thing is that you probably didn't give it enough time, because a lot of this isn't around driving growth just by focusing on growth. It's driving growth by focusing on learnings. So it's almost like you need to focus on how can I learn more quickly about the self-serve experience around the intention, motivation, friction, so that I can solve those rather than like, hey, I want to run experiments just to drive conversion improvement.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
Are there certain companies that shouldn't even consider PLG? And I know you had alluded to that earlier. Like it was, all the rage. Everyone said PLG is the future. And then it was, what else did I see? Community-led growth, event-led growth. Like people just mix stuff up, and then everyone just tries to embrace these new terms. It doesn't work out. Like, are there any red flags for you of like, if you have this type of product, don't even waste your time pursuing PLG? Or is there a PLG strategy for most technology products?
I think there's elements of PLG you can employ across the board. I just think you have to understand like what depth you want to employ it at. So if you, for example, have a pretty technical product, like let's take our product, for example. So with our product, customers build in-app experiences to drive PLG or product engagement usage. And we were fully self-service for ages, and it didn't work because people didn't know how to be effective in building the right experience. They didn't know what data to connect, how to segment effectively. And it's not about how to use the product. No, you could figure that out, but it's about how to use the product in the right way. And so our customer success motion has been really effective and impactful in that. But we can only run a customer success motion, if you start with a sales assist motion and you have a high contract value. And so for us, we realized, and that was one of the pivots we made before Series A, which is like, okay, let's move to a mid-market audience where we do have human assist, even though our whole nature and kind of soul was around product-led growth. So I think it's important to understand like how much coaching do you need to give your customer? I think there's also an aspect of like, is your buyer disconnected from your user? Mm-hmm. If that's the case, PLG will be less successful because you still need to engage your buyer and you still explain to them, and they're not going to be in your product. I think PLG can be less effective if your product is set and forget. Like if you're an API system and people aren't really using an interface because you have less opportunity to like engage them through the product. And I think PLG can be less effective if you're really early in your journey as a product or as a company. You have a couple of hundred users. At that moment, you shouldn't be thinking about trying to scale that. It's really going to be concierge hand-holding in high investment because you're trying to learn really quickly. Now you can, use things like microsurveys to collect feedback more scale, but you shouldn't be like centering around PLG, is my opinion.
And who's that persona for you? Is it product managers?
As our customer?
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly it's product managers, especially those that are oriented around growth challenges, whether it's kind of an activation goal or overall growth goal or retention goal. It can be product marketers. We're seeing the product marketing persona evolve from mostly supporting sales and being kind of around positioning, messaging, packaging, enable sales to actually be like, well, it's our responsibility to communicate and deliver information about a product directly to our end users. So product marketing can be responsible for feature announcements, etc. We are seeing some scaled customer success where customer success, that is trying to approach customer success via tech touch or scale channels. They are also then needing to communicate updates about product or helping drive usage and adoption of features amongst their customer base. So those are three probably main personas. Of course, engineering and design are key stakeholders to make sure experiences look great, they are performative and don't clash with anything in app, and obviously installation, etc. So, but those are the main personas that we speak with.
We had Carlos on from Product School. I see you're connected with him as well. And I see you're also a teacher there, a lecturer, I think, at Product School. What he was telling me was like when he first started, there was no product management discipline, or it was very much like up and coming. So he was trying to market to a group that didn't really exist. You guys were founded, I think, close to the same time. So were you facing something similar? Like, were you trying to market to a persona that didn't really exist yet?
I would say that the persona existed. I don't know if it's that new, but the persona as a buyer maybe didn't exist as much, where product management was really all about building stuff with your engineering team. And that included a bunch of internal tools. And we've seen, companies like Retool, et cetera, to come out to like change that. But PMs were used to building everything. There wasn't as much build versus buy debate. And we still see that. I think PMs love control. So, there's also a little bit of that challenge. And budgets weren't as big. It's certainly much easier to tap into a marketing budget or sales budget. But I think one thing that with the product-led growth movement has made more evident, and I hope more people, including those that listen to this, realize is that your user experience is a revenue center. It drives revenue. It's not just a thing that you need to have that can't be tied to growth. So if you have good user experience, there's consumerization of buying. More and more people are used to great software that's B2C software. More and more individuals are making buying decisions by comparing software. And, for example, now it's not about us, reaching out to the executives and then going top down. It's about us reaching out and to the ICs and them being fans of Chameleon because they're the ones that are making these decisions. So I think there has been a shift as more people realize that user experience is important, product is important, and product has gotten more budget, but it's still not as much as marketing and sales, which are like typically the revenue drivers in a company.
When it comes to the marketing that's really driving your growth, what's working today? What are some of the tactics and strategies that you're deploying?
Yeah, we actually made a mistake on this, which I'm happy to talk about, which is our strategy from the beginning had been content, organic, SEO. And we felt at some point along the journey, the content wasn't good enough. Like it was not deep enough. And, there's folks like Lenny's and others that have done a really good job, Reforge, Kyle Poya, that have done a really good job with content, focus on content. And like our content wasn't up to scratch. And so we said, okay, we're going to deprioritize content. And that was a bad decision. And so we've changed that. And one of the ways that we've changed that is I am now much more involved in writing content. And as an IC, as a reviewer and editor, and as I think about like, where do I spend my time and where is it important for me to spend my time? I've realized founders do need to do this. If your go-to-market motion involves inbound or it is content-led, it is amongst the most important things you can do to drive value for your business. And as an operator and expert, it's so important for you to put out the content that's real expertise that people will resonate with. It can't just simply be the marketing team writing content that, unless you're selling marketing software and there are customers as well, it needs to be the operators that are involved. So that's definitely one thing that we've changed. And I think it's yielding much more impact. I recently spent a lot of time writing a 20,000 word guide on how to buy a DAP, put everything I know about the category into this guide because we found that the people who are more sophisticated as buyers are much more successful as implementers and users. And so how can we coach and teach people in as unbiased way as we can about all of the depth that you should consider and the different facets that you should consider based on your stage of company or your use case or your role. And so I think it's really, really important for us to write content. And that's something that we definitely have been doing much more so.
When it comes to guides like that, are you going to gate that? Is that a gated piece?
We've had opinions about this, but one of the other things that we're writing about actually coming out soon is about value shifting left. More and more stuff is becoming early and early. More and more value is being given earlier and earlier in the funnel, because that's the way you can get an edge and an alpha. If somebody comes to you and gets value quickly. And so I think that our approach to marketing has also shifted away from trying to capture leads and then emailing them to leaving a really strong impression and trusting people will remember our name and come back to us when they're ready. And that happens. I mean, I'll give you another example. Go to a conference. We don't care about the leads list from the conference. What we care about is having really meaningful conversations. And honestly, it doesn't even matter if we don't get your email. Ideally, we connect with you on LinkedIn. But the idea is you leave a good impression such that when they then see our brand or content online, they're more likely to engage with it. And we see that as we evaluated attribution across our channels, there's so many touch points across so many different channels before something becomes an opportunity that it's really about doing good and putting good out there in the world and then hoping that it will come back to you. And so our content isn't gated. It's for everyone. Yes, there are certain things that we try to gate to give you more. So for example, with the DAP bias guide, the whole guide is available, but there's a bunch of templates where we pre-created like an evaluation matrix of how to evaluate, or we pre-created a trial plan. So, okay, for people who are ready for that, that's likely high intent. And so we want to be a bit more connected with you. So anyway, that's our approach. It's always a moving kind of boundary, but we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's being heavily debated right now by a lot of companies. Like, I personally very much believe in that idea of what you're pursuing of like, don't gate it. I don't know about you, but like in the history of when I've downloaded things, I never once have been thankful when a salesperson reaches out to me. Normally I download, I get the book or get the guide, and then I immediately unsubscribe. Like that is not intent. I'm just in learning mode there. And I think a lot of other people are in a very similar way where like you almost are more harmed by gating it than if you just left it open and let people get it themselves.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about knowing the mindset of somebody and the channel reputation. Like the channel reputation for email follow-ups from events and gated content is really poor. So I'm automatically going to assume that this is going to be annoying and I'm going to unsubscribe or exit. And that's the same, we have to appreciate the channel reputation for in-app experiences. The channel reputation for pop-ups is really low. Like for guided walkthroughs, people are exiting immediately. So you have to realize like, okay, if you're going to go in with an approach of like, I'm going to show something to a user, it's facing that uphill battle. And maybe you show something super compelling, your email subject line will be amazing and you'll connect with it. Great. But you have to accept that and work with that. So, I mean, for example, with the outbound emails that we're sending, we're oriented to now like inviting people to events. It's like, hey, we're not selling anything. Do you want to come to a dinner? And like that's something, even that can be hard to sell because it's like, hey, but what are you going to do? Are you going to pitch me? Are you going to take my money? So it's just the reputation you have to work with. And we try to be really user experience oriented. We're a user experience company. So we try to think about what is the user experience at every touch point and try to lean into what would be a good user experience at those touch points.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
That'd be a red flag, I think, if you guys just had like a shit user experience outside of the product. It's like the expectations are high. You have to have a good user experience across the board with everything, right? Every brand interaction you have.
Yeah, and that's beyond product. That's on a sales call. That's marketing blog post. That's a during recruitment process. That's their job posting. Like it has to be a really good user experience, and that's going to attract the right kind of people, the right kind of customer, the right kind of employee, the right kind of investor. Like we care about user experience a lot.
Yeah, I won't name the platform, but there's a customer success platform that we were using, and they just had like the worst customer success ever. And I was just thinking, like, how is this possible? Like, if all companies have good customer success, like I expect you to have good customer success, but they dropped the ball on it, which like it happens a lot, I think.
Yeah, I can understand it from a founder builder perspective. It's hard to get all this stuff right, but it's cutthroat now. So you have to set the example and you have to be, exceptional rather than the norm.
You mentioned events there. Can you unpack the event strategy and what that looks like?
Yeah, it's been something that we've been toying with and playing with for most of this year. Essentially, we've been experimenting with two different things. One is conferences. Like, what should our presence at a conference look like? Should we be speaking? Should we be having branding on the lanyards? Should we have a booth? What should we do at the booth? And the second thing is hosted events. And what should our hosted events look like? How big should they be? Should they be seated dinners with 12 people, 20 people? Should they be execs? Should they be ICs? And some of the learnings that we've come to is that hosted works way better. than conferences, because maybe part of the scale that we're at, but if you can get 30 people into a room and that can generate opportunities, that's super valuable than having 100 people or 200 people come by a booth where there's like, fleeting interest or lack of ICP. Hosted events have given us the opportunity to invite customers, to invite target people, target accounts. But also what we've seen is that there's second order benefits. So if your hosted event goes well, the second time round you do that hosted event, you go to the first group of people and be like, can you bring a friend or can you tell other people about this? That second order value is really high because it's great people that we're not connected to. The second thing we've learned, and this is specifically for our audience, is that it can't be a sales event. It's a no agenda product event. We bring product people there. We say, hey, there's some things you might want to talk about, like your product diversification strategy or your tooling, but there's no pitch. There's no, hey, everyone, like listen to this thing. So it's very light touch. It's very organic. So those things are working well. Oh, the other thing we're learning is that tier 2 cities, there's a lot more appetite for these events because a lot of people relocated from the hubs like San Francisco, New York, where their families are, or places with more space. And they've gone to Denver and Austin and Miami and San Diego. But since they've relocated during COVID, there's been not that many events happening in those places because everything obviously stopped during COVID and it hasn't really come back. So there's a big opportunity in these tier 2 cities to run events and build community. And so that's another thing we're seeing. So anyway, laying out all of my strategies around events here. So hopefully that's helpful to somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the point of like not selling is so important. Like I went to an event a couple months ago and it felt like a timeshare pitch. Like you get there, you're having a good conversation, and then like they immediately made it a sales conversation, which is like awful, like negative brand impact. Like I think more and more brands are probably going to follow what you're following, which sounds kind of scary from like a marketing perspective of like, yeah, we're going to like spend all this money, spend all this time, and like we're not going to directly try to sell. But in the long run, I think you get more sales by not selling than if you do try to sell in those events.
So I think it requires a little bit of confidence, a little bit of faith. It's like, hey, good user experience pays. And I think we see that, we know that, we feel that. But it's like, if you're under a marketing pressure to hit a quarterly goal because you're running out of runway and you have to raise a fund, then you make some bad decisions maybe. So I think there's a little bit of like, do you have the confidence and faith to do those things? And, even in the follow-ups, it's like we try to be really organic about it. It's all about personal connection. People and founders may jump too early to doing things that don't scale. Like I'm still like DMing people to come to these events. And I think that creates connection, relationship, and often that's what leads to opportunities. So I think founders still have to be number one, like SDR in a way, but it's, so much of it is to do with direct relationships.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more effective coming from you than like an SDR, right? Like they're going to respond to that, be more interested in that. So that all makes sense. What else outside of events? Anything else that you're doing to drive growth?
Yeah, I think so. We talked about great content, like expertise content, events. We've dabbled with like sponsorships. I think one of the key things that we think about from a marketing perspective is like, what's the long tail? Like, what's the stuff that the big companies aren't doing, but there's like pockets of community, pockets of people. It could be a small newsletter. It could be a small meetup. So we're exploring those things. Certainly, like positioning is still an ongoing challenge. We're trying to think, what we've learned recently from a conference, we're talking about in-app UX patterns. And that kind of messaging lands really well in San Francisco with PMs who are like, we get it, but it doesn't land with people who are like from a UPS, like, hey, what are you talking about? So for them, it's like, user onboarding. So I think splitting our positioning, including on our website, to be very, very personalized, that's something, we're planning on and working on. So I don't know, there's a whole bunch of initiatives around that for Q4. I'm happy to do a follow-up and tell you what landed or didn't land.
And when it comes to growth milestones that you've celebrated, what's one that you can share with us and talk about?
Yeah, one thing that we reflected on is we closed our biggest deal ever. And it was hefty, well north of 6 figures. And the interesting thing was when we first went to market, our first price point was, I think, like 100x lower. So it's like 100x difference in the price points. And I think that shows the journey that we've taken as a product. And, when you're selling like to an enterprise, you have to have a lot of depth. There's a lot of testing. There was multiple months of detailed testing and many, many people involved. So I think I'm proud of the maturity the product has gotten. And of course, our go-to-market motion. It was also a company that switched from an existing provider. So they knew a lot. And that provider is way bigger than us. So that's pretty cool to see that our product can outperform this much bigger provider. So that was definitely worth celebrating. And a lot that came together to make that happen.
What were the big learnings there? If a founder's listening in, they want to replicate that. They want the big deals. Like, was there anything specific that you learned securing that deal?
I mean, I think it was like a year-long relationship. Like, I don't think these things happen quickly when you're really at the bigger end of things. And the previous time they wanted to buy Chameleon, but they didn't have enough time to get before their renewal. So then it started almost in the previous cycle and continued. I think I've learned that in that process, anything that goes wrong is also an opportunity to build trust and credibility. So it's not that nothing will go wrong. It's just how do you react when things go wrong? So when there's an issue, like how can you swarm and solve it really quickly? And people, when they're buyers at this level, they get it. They're like, things will go wrong. They're looking for partnership as well. It's like, can you solve it? And so I don't know. I think maybe that's not very new or innovative founders. They typically do swarm issues, but getting the whole team to do that and feel that over the course of the buying process is one of the things that I think help the customer feel very, very confident in the partnership for a long term.
As you reflect on this entire journey, what do you think is the most important go-to-market decision that you've made so far?
I think one of the key decisions has been around hiring builders. And a lot of the folks that are really successful on our sales team didn't do sales before, but had that building mindset of let me figure it out. Same with marketing. The people who are leading marketing started by writing content. And so I think, both hiring people that are builders and then also me being part of that building process of me writing content, me doing outreach, me doing sales allows me to relate to them and make decisions appropriately. So I think hiring builders versus hiring managers has probably been the key thing to help with GTM success.
And what about fundraising? So as I mentioned there in the intro, 15 million raised to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have a few high value tactical tips that I'll share. So here we go. Number one, when you're raising funding, find somebody that invests in the kind of company that you are, that's a friend or friendly, and make them a partner in your pitch practice. So for example, a principal or an associate at a fund that may not invest directly in you, but invest in similar companies, make them a pitch partner because they're going to give you the much better feedback than angels or other founders. Like, everyone gets help from their founder friends or angels, but they don't see the decks that you're trying to, from the VCs, trying to raise from C. So get someone like that and have them iterate with you on the story. The story is so key. So that's, I think, really high value if you can do that. Number two, have an excellent pre-read. So everyone asks for your deck. Don't send the deck, just send a great pre-read. That will scratch the itch that people have because they want a bit more information. In that pre-read, don't have to reveal everything, but give them some insights. Give them some things that you've learned that they can learn so they can feel like you're an intelligent person that's learning things. In that, make sure you talk about the inflection, like why now is so key. Rising tide lifts all boats. And that's how the investors think. Like, why is this market hot? Why is the unlock that you've driven hot? Number four, or I don't know if number three, handle objections proactively and preemptively after your pitch. So you may pitch to a partner. It may be a great conversation. It really lands, but then they have to go pitch to their team and their team will have objections for them. And if you have not equipped them to handle those objections, they may not come back to you with asking for help. And they may be like, oh yeah, I can't answer these and therefore the deal's dead. And I had that experience. We had multiple meetings with this one partner who thought great, really behind it, went and spoke to their partnership and then was like, we're out. I was like, wait, what happened? And they're like, well, I couldn't get conviction on these three things. It's like, but you didn't even talk to me about these things. I have great answers about these three things. And so you may not get the opportunity for that. So in your follow-up email or in your follow-up deck, like have an appendix where you proactively deal with objections so you can arm them to be successful. So I guess those are maybe some of the key things I think for folks pitching. Hopefully they'll get value out of that.
And I've asked like 700 people and like very rarely do we ever get like real tactical stuff. Normally it's like, well, find an investor who aligns with your core values, get along with, it's like a marriage. So appreciate you making that actionable and useful there. Final question here before we wrap up. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like?
I think the big picture vision is that software user experience is going to become more and more personalized. So that if you and I sign up for the same tool, we'll see completely different things based on our history, our intent, and our data. But how do you make that user experience truly personal? Today, we do it in a really simple way, or we're trying to do it in a really simple way, which is chat. I was like, okay, you'll get different chat or different content, but that isn't good enough. The user experience itself, the framework, the architecture of the app, what you see, how everything's oriented should be different. Building that is really hard in-house. And so that's what Chameleon is about, is how do we help teams chip away at that? We don't want to offer that today because they'll be like, wait, what? That's confusing. So it's about chipping away by personalizing user experiences to be in the right moment, in the right context, with the right user.
Amazing. I love it. All right, man, we're up on time, so we're going to have to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in, want to follow with you, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Probably LinkedIn. Yeah, I love chatting on LinkedIn. Feel free to DM me or connect, but that's my kind of go-to platform where I try and share regular insights.
Thanks so much for taking time. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.